It's such an honor to be speaking to you, Leopoldo, and talk about your work and fearless fight for freedom in Venezuela. Leopoldo López is a Venezuelan democracy activist and opposition leader. He was the former mayor of a district in Caracas and today lives in exile and advocates for democracy and freedom around the world. Leopoldo, you started your political life in Venezuela around the same time that Hugo Chavez was elected democratically in 1999. At that time, Venezuela was one of the richest nations in Latin America, with the largest oil reserve in the world. And today, Venezuela is facing a total social and humanitarian collapse. It is one of the worst humanitarian crises in the history of Latin America. According to a recent UN report, more than 7 million people have fled the country. That means 25 people of the country's population have migrated. How could Venezuela have gone from being one of the wealthiest countries in the region with stable democratic institutions to sliding into a brutal dictatorship that has presided over the complete destruction of its economy? Were there signs at that time when you started your political life?
Well, again, thank you very much for the opportunity of sharing with you. And as you very well say, the story of Venezuela is a tragic story. Venezuela is a country that has the largest oil reserves in the planet, natural resources. It has capacity to develop the agricultural industry, tourism, manufacture, strategic placing in the Western Hemisphere. But unfortunately, because of mismanagement, corruption, and primarily because of the wrong ideas of statism, socialism, and what was called socialism, because it was really never about that. It was about oppression to the people. It became very quickly one of the poorest countries in the entire Americas, competing with Haiti today. So as you said, 25% of the population fled our country, are now living in different countries around the world. That's 7.1 million people. That is above the number of people that have left Ukraine, or the number of people that left Syria, with the difference that in Ukraine and Syria, there were wars. In Venezuela, there was a war of the dictators, of the autocrats against the people. They mismanaged billions and billions of dollars that came into the country between 2004 and 2014 because of oil income. And very soon they threw the country into a tragic humanitarian crisis that has led more than 90% of the population living in poverty. And the root cause for this, in one word, Nicolás Maduro, the dictatorship, the autocratic model that has been imposed in our country. And that becomes for us a challenge, understanding the root cause to have the solution to the problems Venezuelans are facing today. We need to overcome the dictatorship, conquer freedom, democracy, and human rights. For us, democracy, human rights, freedom are not abstract words, are not issues afar from theory or poetry or music. For us, it's the way we live, the way we hope to live, and the way we have suffered as the people of a nation that have lost all of our liberties.
You were the mayor of Caracas at age 26, one of the youngest mayors in the country during the early years of Chavismo. You became a very popular political figure, and that obviously was a serious threat to a dictator. You also won the Transparency International Awards for the most transparent municipality in Venezuela in 2007 and 2028. How did you manage to build so much support? And when did your journey clash with the authoritarian trajectory of Chavez?
Well, I became mayor very early after Chavez won. Chavez won in 1989, and he proposed what was called a Constituent Assembly to change the Constitution. And that was the beginning of the end, because by packing the Constitution, changing the rule of law, changing the composition, everything started to crumble. It took many years. We didn't lose democracy from one day to the other. But yeah, that was the beginning. At that time, I was teaching at the university. I was working at an oil company, the PDVSA, the National Oil Company, in the Office for Strategic Planning, but decided to run for office. I lost for the Constituent Assembly, but then I decided to run for the municipality of Caracas, in my municipality. As you said, I was very young, and we were a very young group of people, very committed to public policy, very hungry to do things, and we became very, very successful. We built a very successful healthcare system. We changed the tax structure, so we attracted more investment. It became the investment hub of the city. It became the safest part of Caracas and Venezuela. We developed parks, street plazas, markets. We did many, many things, and the municipality became a showcase for the hopes of the metropolitan area. And that's when things started to that's when the clash that you mentioned started. At that time, we had more popularity than Chavez in Caracas, who was a very popular figure in Venezuela at the time, as you might remember. And that's when they started going after us. That's when I was disqualified to run for office. The last time I was able to run for office was almost 20 years ago, in the year 2004. Ever since then, I have been involved in politics, but on the fringes of being able to be elected. So I was disqualified to run for office, and then we decided to put together a movement, a civil resistance, non-violent movement that was dedicated to promote freedom and conquering democracy in Venezuela. So we went around the country, and we incorporated and trained thousands of people, most of them very young. And in the year 2014, we called for street protests, and tens of thousands of people came out to the street. And in one of the protests, the two people were killed close to me with shots in the back of their head, and they blamed me for it. I had to go into hiding for some days, and then I turned myself in voluntarily. There was a warrant for my arrest, but I had the chance to escape, even with the suggestion of the own dictatorship that wanted me out of Venezuela at the time. But I decided to turn myself in because, as Martin Luther King says in the letter to his brothers from Birmingham prison, he says, nonviolence is about showing the scars of the system. And once you show the scars of the system that is putrefied, you can mobilize the society to bring about change. And that is true. And that is why I presented myself. I was taken to a military prison where I spent the next 4 years, most of the time in solitary confinement. I was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Then in the year 2017, I was taken to house arrest. Then I called again for protest, and they took me back to military prison, again to solitary confinement. Then they took me back to house arrest. In the year 2019, I was able to escape house arrest with the collaboration of my own guards, the custody that were there. And I seek refuge at the Spanish embassy in Caracas, where I stayed the next 1 year and a half. So in total, I spent 7 years under confinement, and almost 2 years ago, I was able to escape Venezuela. So that's 20 years in two minutes.
I mean, you were recognized as a prisoner of conscience by Amnesty International, and how did you survive the 2 years of solitary confinement? It was a military prison. You were isolated in this whole building. How did you keep hope? How did you keep going? How was, the challenge mentally and physically?
I had read a lot about experiences of other political prisoners. There was a warrant for my arrest months before. Then they took it back. And that presented me with a real and present danger of going to prison. So I started thinking about this and trying to learn from the experiences of other prisoners of conscience. And of all of the experiences that are all very different, there's one thing that is common: having a routine. So the first night I got to prison thinking that I needed to put together a routine. I developed my routine around three things: around the heart, the soul, the mind, and the body. So every day I would pray. I'm a Catholic, but as many Catholics, I was baptized. I did my first communion, but kind of a mechanical Catholic. But when I went to prison, this was a very important pillar for me. So praying and being close to God was the first thing. The second is that I would exercise however I could my mind. I would read, write, draw, and try to exercise my mind. And I would exercise physically. So I did those three things every day with sport and discipline, not thinking about the next day. And I think that's where the key was. Because if you're a prisoner in confinement and you are thinking about the day when you're going to be free, you always have the temptation to bring that day closer to your present. And if that day doesn't come, that leads to frustration. And I think this is also true for the struggle that we have as a nation. If we set ourselves, a concrete day and a moment where we say, this is the day when we will be free, and then the day comes and you're not free, the consequence of that is frustration. So that's how I was able to deal with many years of solitary confinement and many years of imprisonment. But the most important of all for me was having a purpose. And I believe this is true for anybody who could be listening to this. I really think that happiness is not about smiling. It's not about comfort. For me, at least, it's about having a purpose. My purpose for many years has been having a free Venezuela, a better Venezuela, a democratic Venezuela that can provide well-being and opportunities for all of the people in our country, all the rights to all of the people. That's how we define our promised land. All the rights for all of the people, as simple as that. But that entails many things that need to be done. So I was blessed to have a purpose, and that's what's been keeping me going for many years. And that was for me the stable point. And of course, my wife, that was always with me. She was my voice. She was my company, my family, my children, the love to my children, to my wife, and to our cause. And that has kept me going and enthusiastic and optimistic to continue to go forward.
So your wife Lillian was advocating for you, and she led campaigns around the world to ask for your release. Was that helpful at the moment when you were in prison, or there were repercussions because your wife was going around the world and asking for you to be out?
Well, my wife Lillian, she's a school teacher by training, but then she became the Venezuelan kitesurf national champ. And she was not involved in politics. And but we were very close, and we were very close as a couple, and also in extreme sports. And I think that was very important. So when I went into prison, she assumed to be my voice. I said, now this is on you. You need to be the voice of the movement, of what we're doing, and you need to go around the world and around the country to tell the people what is happening, and to call for the freedom of all political prisoners. And she was very effective. At first, she was not even, the doors were not open to the places she was visiting to. But she insisted, and then things started to change, and she was being received and talking to members of parliament, to presidents of countries, to the Pope, to the Dalai Lama, and to many other people, to bring in the cause of Venezuela, the tragedy that Venezuela was going through, to the world public opinion. But what you asked, were there consequences to that? Yes, there were. Every time she met with somebody, a president or a pope, or the Pope, I'm sorry, I would have, they would come into my cell, 10 to 12 armed men with dark suits and with masks, with machine guns, to intimidate. And they would always say the same thing. They would say, if your wife continues to do this, we will continue to do this. If your wife continues to talk openly, we will continue to pressure you. And I said, you can come every day, because my wife will continue to do that every day. and I would encourage her to continue to go. In my view, prison it can either break you or make you stronger, and I have seen that because in my party we had more than 500 political detainees. So I have seen how some people are broken, but others become stronger. I became stronger in prison.
And now in exile, you continued of course, your advocacy work in Venezuela. And, sadly, Maduro is still clinging to power. There are hundreds of political prisoners. The GDP has collapsed by 80%. The currency has lost almost all of its value. People are starving. How do you see the future of the pro-democracy movement in these conditions? Like, when people are starving, when their money is worthless, where can they find the strength and the tool to keep fighting for political freedom? And, how are Venezuelans circumventing this centralized economy today to survive?
Well, I think that the conviction of 80% of Venezuelans, if not more, is that change needs to happen. And yes, people are struggling. And yes, people are suffering very much. And people have been going through humanitarian tragedy in our country. But they continue to fight for freedom. We've gone through a long period of a cycle. We've been up, we've been down, we've been close to making change happen. We've been far away. But the important thing is that we need to continue to understand how things evolve and how we become more efficient. So one of the challenges that we have is how to give people tools to become independent from the tentacles of the dictatorship. And one of them is the financial. Venezuela went through, and this is very difficult for people to understand. 3 years ago, Venezuela had 25,000% inflation. I repeat, the inflation of Venezuela 3 years ago was 25,000. Let me show you this. I think this would be. So this is a bill of Venezuela. So as you can read here, it's 1 million bolívares. 1 million bolívares. One bill, 1 million bolívares. And you will see that this bill in 6 months' time will be worthless, as it was. So the way the management of the economy in Venezuela, it's been tremendous for the Venezuelan people. And this is true for many Latin American countries, for many African countries. In fact, if you look at the countries that have hyperinflation and the highest rate of inflation, they are all autocratic regimes, all of them. So there is a direct correlation between autocracy and inflation. So people need to find ways in which they can safeguard the value of their own money, because safeguarding their value in this type of currency, it's impossible. So one of the things that we've been looking at is how to use technology for freedom, how to create the convergence between financial freedom and political freedom. And I am convinced that this is something that opens immense opportunities, not just for the people living under oppressed countries, but also for initiatives, for people who are developing technologies, new tools, to give people the possibility to save, to transact, to do commerce, to receive remittances. Just to give you an example, the remittances that go into Latin America every year is $130 billion every year. But this is costly for the people who send and for the people who receive. So of those 130 billion, at least between 15 and 20% is the transaction costs, if not more. So there needs to be ways in which that gets to the people in more effective, in more transparent, and in more direct ways. So these are some of the things that we believe need to be understood and developed as opportunities to promote financial freedom, also as a convergence with political freedom.
So are people already using these, alternative way to transact? I mean, we know they're already starting to rely on US dollars for transaction, but what else is working currently? Like, what else are they using to circumvent that centralized economy? And
well, what is interesting is that all over the world we see a pattern that in the countries that are autocratic and the countries that are susceptible to hyperinflation or high rates of inflation are the countries where there is more presence of cryptocurrencies. And this is for a reason, because people are not using cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or others, as a luxury, because they think it's cool, or this is an alternative to their banking. It's because they don't have an alternative. So these are ways for people to store the value of their money and to transact in ways that if they don't have those tools, they wouldn't have ways of doing it. So in our case in Venezuela, in the year 2020, we had a very interesting experience. It was COVID, as we all remember, and there were some funds that were seized from the dictatorship. And we presented a project to give direct cash transfers to medical doctors and nurses. And we went out and registered almost 80,000 medical doctors and nurses. And we gave them a tool, which was a wallet, giving them the opportunity to register and then for us to send them direct cash transfers. This is a project that was the first time the US government, the Treasury, and OFAC approved a project that was using crypto. And it was super successful because 95 or even more, 96% of the funds went directly to the people. Today, when you do aid programs mainly through the UN ecosystem, this is what happens. Of every dollar that goes into that funnel, 40 cents of the dollar stay in the UN or in the countries that are providing the benefit. Roughly 20 cents of the dollar stay in the local NGO, and then only 40% of the dollar go directly to the beneficiaries in whatever program. That's more or less a rule of thumb. In a project like this, using technology, there can be more efficiency, but also more transparency, and also safeguarding the beneficiaries. So I believe for sure that technology and financial freedom is one of the cornerstones of political freedom.
And the Venezuelan government cannot, freeze your account in that case, and cannot use money as a weapon to repress and control. Because even if you're not in Venezuela, they have ways to also, freeze your bank account. Is that something you've encountered?
Yes. Well, unfortunately, Venezuelans, and this is true for many others. I have been in contact over the past year with many brothers and sisters that are fighting against autocratic regimes from all over the world, from Russia, Belarus, Zimbabwe, Cambodia, Hong Kong, Nicaragua, Cuba. Our story is very similar. So when I'm talking about Venezuela, you can talk very similarly about the struggle in all of these countries. So yes, I mean, we all have problems trying to engage in the financial systems, not just the regimes in the local country, in our home countries, but also outside, because our countries are sanctioned, so the population also sees the negative effects of this. But there are ways of going around it with technology, again, with the use of new tools that can provide support. So I think that this is something that needs to be one of the priorities in thinking about how to bring about freedom around the world, is how to bring about financial freedom. And in order to bring about financial freedom, one of the big questions that needs to be answered is how to make freedom investable. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that there needs to be a way in which the development of all of these new technologies provided to billions of people who are now living under autocratic regimes, many of them that are unbanked, that are not linked to any parts of the financial system, can become banked, can become part of the users of this new technology that could provide even sources of micro jobs that they can get some earning. And all of this might be possible because of technology. But there needs to be, in my view, the need to think beyond the current European or American or Western markets and think about Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, places where there are billions of people in need of opportunities, in need of mechanisms to save and store the value of their money, and ways in which they can do transparent and effective transactions.
Yeah. To end on a hopeful note, tell us about your latest initiative to bring together democracy activists from all around the world. And how can these technologies be helpful in their work, and why is international solidarity important?
Well, as I was telling you, I left Venezuela almost 2 years ago. And the most frequent question that I was asked by presidents, prime ministers, or just regular people in the street was, why is Maduro still in power? And there are many ways to answer that question. But in my view, the most important or the most relevant reason why Maduro is still in power is because of the international support that he has from China, from Iran, from Russia, from Turkey, from Cuba, in different ways. And that translates in financial support, diplomatic support, militarily support, kleptocratic support, which are the pillars of stability, not just for the Maduro dictatorship. This is also true for Cuba, for Nicaragua, for Belarus, and for many other places where autocrats are part of an ecosystem. So knowing that that was the case, I started to meet different people, many of them through the Human Rights Foundation and the Oslo Freedom Forum. And we started talking about how we were not only confronting our local autocrat. I was not only confronting Maduro, we were also confronting Xi Jinping and Putin and Lukashenko and Ortega and all of these dictators. So we made the commitment to join efforts together. So talking to Garry Kasparov from Russia, Masih Alinejad from Iran, and others, we decided to promote what we are calling the World Liberty Congress, which is an event that will gather more than 130 leaders and activists from more than 40 countries that are under autocratic regimes. And we will be not just listening to other people to come to talk to us, but talking among ourselves around issues that we know are critical for the path toward freedom. So we will be discussing in working groups around grassroots activism, political prisoners, narrative and how to win the narrative and confront disinformation, fake news, and all of that is affecting the struggle for freedom. How to address anti-kleptocracy and corruption. And very important, how to use technology and finance for freedom. And we will gather for 3 days in working groups. And the idea is to develop an agreed, a built together action plan to go forward in these areas and to cooperate amongst us. And it's not just the working and the projects that will come out, but also the human part of it. For me, it has been very gratifying to get to know people who are living the same struggle that I've lived through, that have gone through the same cycles of being in prison, of being away from your family, of going to exile, even of feeling bad, or getting depressed, or feeling questioned by yourself, by people, being misunderstood, not having the support, and many times not having the means, not having the resources. And I believe that the getting to know our stories or realities will help us to go forward with the optimism that we will prevail and that we will conquer freedom. And this is something that I am sure will benefit each single country. Because if we assume that this is a global struggle for freedom, and understanding the problem through a global perspective will allow us to be more effective at the local level of each one of our countries.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Leopoldo.
Thank you. Thank you, Céline, for this opportunity and for the great work that you continue to do at the Human Rights Foundation.
Thank you.